Fint. Ja, flott.
Du där, nu jukset du. Jukset. Okej. Men nu vi må få litt nærkamp også. Ja. Så begynner sånn vanlig.
Litt nærkamp.
Ja.
Litt inne.
Ja.
Og litt lyd.
Ja, nettopp.
Skal du, angriper du?
Jeg angriper. Well, this play boxing, this play with boxing gloves has made some kind of impression also in other countries. They're quoting, saying that Næss, he has a complicated character. He's boxing, which is impossible for a Ghanaian. They imply, they don't say it, but it's so ridiculous because play and sport is different, and there's too much sport and too little play, I think, today. And playfulness is basic, I think, in life. And the more suffering, the more playfulness. The more you see of suffering, the more you need playfulness.
And dignity tells a professor or a philosopher to behave as if he were stiff inside and outside completely.
But when I met my present wife, Kit Fai, we met together playfully. As a Mandarin, as a lecturer in Hong Kong, I behaved completely impossible. And she liked that, and so she's now my wife. And we had this together. So there's a lot to learn there at the colleges and universities to skip all this quasi-scientific way of behavior and let philosophy be something tremendously different from science. Then you can have more people who are acting from the deepest in themselves and not seeing action as something very different from their study of philosophy. Well, mountains, of course, that goes back to infancy, when I was able to go with my older brothers into the mountains. And somehow, I cannot say exactly why, but freedom was equated with getting above the tree line. Somehow, I don't know why. Perspective and many things have to do with it, but from already at 10 years old, I had this dream of having a tiny cottage on this mountain and live there most of the time. I didn't know exactly how tremendously different the climate would be there. Wind, especially winds, where it's Arctic climate, completely Arctic climate, and the summer is only 1 month. My mother had a cottage high in the mountains, above timberline, and then far away, according to my mind, tremendously far away, you had a mountain like an enormous wall, and on the top of this enormous wall there was then still higher small peaks and so on. And that mountain, Hallingskarvet, I saw as living being which had all the qualities I would like to have, but I didn't have. Equanimity, unruffledness. Deep inside, the deepest part inside, there is something that's completely quiet. And that place, Tvärgastein, has then been the place where I belong. One of the great movements or sub-movements of today is to get people to identify with place and to identify with surroundings, to identify with the landscape. Something in ourselves murdered when we destroy deep relation between ourselves and the immediate surrounding. Tvärgastein is situated 1,500 feet above the tree line, and there is no kind of trail leading to it, and we have to carry everything. This makes for self-reliance. For instance, in the winter when we had 4 or even 5 containers of water, which we got from the lake, then every time I would pass those 4 or 5 containers, I would say, oh, what a richness, what richness. Well, at the age of 14, 15, 16, like other people, I was interested in real problems, life problems. And what do you mean by having a life? Is it just to get an education, then a family, and then be a grandfather and then die? So a lawyer I met in the mountains of Norway, and he said, what suits you would be Spinoza. And I looked into Spinoza and found it. And then Spinoza is, first of all, somebody with a total view. Everything is connected, and there is something, and that's kind of creative force in humans, in everything, which he called God. He had this expression, God or nature, connecting 2 words for the same. And then he had something marvelous about you cannot avoid being glad and seeing the world as something to be glad about. You cannot avoid that if you are completely active from your own nature. what makes me feel quite a serious meaning in life, in my life, is the ecological crisis, because I can add to my feeling for nature. I can add a sense of being useful socially and politically by coining the term deep ecology. And this has to do with relating deepest feelings and attitudes, relating that to practice, your own practice in life. And of course, I had a kind of practical philosophy, therefore, when I was suddenly made a full professor in 1939, 27 years old, I said that, of course, people who would specialize in philosophy, that could not be coerced to be seen at the campus at all, except at certain examinations. So also I myself would say I will be here on the campus Tuesdays from 6 o'clock until Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and nothing else, because as a philosopher, how could one live on the campus? I mean, either up in the mountains or some kind of conflict areas or something. And at that time, it was possible to carry through this kind of conception of being a philosopher, different from being a professor of philosophy.
I was close to the logical empiricists in 1934-35 before I was professor. And I was close to the American pragmatism in opposition to Bertrand Russell, for instance, who were more intellectual. I was more influenced by zoology, botany, geology, and the natural nature. But then I asked myself more closely whether I could support empiricism as a total system, and that was impossible, I found out. So I went into a kind of skepticism, disbelieving in the possibility to have any kind of systems. And this leads me then to the philosophy of diversity of lifestyles and diversity of world conceptions, and opposition to the belief in that there should or could be a scientific worldview. There will be no definite worldview in the future, I hope.
Philosophy, I think, today would be conceived as philosophy of life, first of all. And that's easy to say, that what's driving you, what's your aims, basically what's hunting you, and what are you hunting. So what we need is, of course, academic philosophers, but we need much more philosophers, in the sense of old-fashioned kind of maximum perspective, deepness of perspective and broadness of perspective, and who act from this perspective always. So you need people who are living according to their philosophy, in the sense that the philosophy is relevant to what they decide every day. So I think today we must change universities and colleges in the direction of how to make it more easy for people who have a broad and deep perspective to retain that through college and university, and to retain the stress on praxis, that's to say, how you live, how you influence the politicians, local or others, how you influence people. And with a tremendous formal education as you have in the West, you should be able to articulate your views and therefore stand up against technocracy and stand up against the unthinking kind of policies we have in the West at the moment. Well, it's clear that I have been very early and very deeply concerned about the problems Gandhi was taking up. His aim was to free India, which he meant to free the Indians. And he said that political freedom is a good instrument for arriving at freedom, but don't mix those two things together. To fight for freedom and to fight for freedom from England. But this, that we have the bosses who are English, that is, it's not good for self-respect. And that's, with a bad self-respect, you don't get free, you get to be a free person. It was known for insisting on getting all the facts on the table and trying to agree about the facts and then proceed what can be done to resolve the conflict. Get into the center of the conflict. Don't stay outside. Whatever happens, don't stay outside. Get into the center. When he went to England, and they said, no, you cannot go in this area of industry because they hate the Indian policy of starting making their own clothes. So he went there, and his appearance, he has then a language or behavior that immediately cools down people. And the workers said, okay, of course you must do what you wish in India. But the British government must do something to help us because we get to be unemployed. So it's our problem, not your problem.
Whatever the results of the mission that brought me to London, I know that I shall carry with me the pleasantest memory of my stay in the midst of the poor people of East London.
So I think that Gandhi showed that we can always meet an opponent, whatever his view, religious or other, we can always meet in a way that calm down the passions and make communication possible. According to Luther, there are bad people and good people, and humans are somehow above nature, etc. In Gandhian thinking, you cannot distinguish this way, that there are bad and good people, but you have good or bad actions, and how can we reduce the power of bad actions? How can we maybe change people to some extent? Gandhi would say that we have to go to use satyagraha, non-violent resistance, which is an active, militant resistance where you don't mind blood on your side, but you mind blood on the other side. So you see, Gandhianism is very different from pacifism. They were occupied 5 years by the Nazis. And you may ask whether we in Norway should have reacted with non-violence against the occupation. As to the first question, I would say, sure, we could have stopped Hitler without any kind of military means. But then we had to start, we had to start in 1918, 1919, 1920 to have helped Germany to get back into normality, economically. And many people in 1919, 1920, 1921 thought about things like Gandhi did. If they had had more power, it could easily been stopped. But as I say, we had to go far back. We can talk about training of people. What's the outlook? How much do the military establishment do for developing a non-violent attitude? The military establishment could do both. And in Norway, the military establishment didn't do anything to make us able to do non-violence during the occupation. But if we had had some education and had complete non-violent resistance to the occupation forces, it would have a tremendous influence internationally, I think. One of the things which is so characteristic of mountains is greatness. The mountain, the Hallingskarv, is great. And if we interpret that in a little wrong way, we talk about the bigness of mountains. So Himalaya being biggest in the world, we have to go to the Himalaya. But I resisted that temptation until 1949 or 48 because I knew that it means organization, administration, and coming together, talking about inessentials. But nevertheless, I went then twice, 3 times. I thought. And the greatest moment for me was, I remember when in North Pakistan, it was a tremendous mountain at that time, Tirich, I was climbing with my friends. Impressive. We made the first ascent of Tirich at that time, number 3 highest that had been climbed and so on and so on. And that, of course, made me more notorious and made an impact in newspapers and so on. But it doesn't mean much from a philosophical point of view, not at all. Unfortunately, people in their poor countries, when seeing all these tourists who seem to have to be completely free, no work, nothing, they just stroll around and we must get hold of the things they have. And there, one main goal for next century is, of course, that we go down in the material standard of living, so that the world would see a development of the poor countries. So richness and luxury, if it has at all philosophical meaning, must be related to what you feel and what you have compared to certain other people. What they have is irrelevant, completely irrelevant, especially if you live in a rich industrial society.
Har du litt varmt vann, Kitfai?
There's so little you really need compared to what you think you need. So I got the slogan, which is so important in the deep ecology movement, that rich life, simple means. Not simple life, I had the most complex life I ever had. I have had more than 10 years I have been at Tvers because wife, child, and everything you need, including a couple of thousand volumes of literature. Because my 2-volume philosophy of history of philosophy made me carry more than 200 pounds of books, complete works of Kant, complete work of Descartes, and so on. And to stay there, I got free from most conventions how a history of philosophy should be. So what people should do, also as students of philosophy, is to find meaning, find where they stand, where their innermost being, what direction they really feel they belong. And then interpret the philosophers according to what they feel. And that's what I do with Spinoza. Whereas people think, oh, Næss, he is saying that Spinoza is the philosophy we should use in the ecological crisis. No, I never make any propaganda for Spinoza. But I am seeing things in the way that is suggested by Spinoza according to my interpretation. If you know what you feel for and you know what you are, to some extent, you automatically get inventive and creative, automatically. And so in the ecological crisis, for instance, you had to go in to be activist. You have a religion or you have a philosophy, and you have a conception of yourself, and you act from all that. And the Gandhian resistance presupposes that you try and try and try within the law. And after having done that, not seeing any kind of opportunity to reach the goal, you break laws. But the breaking of law is not to directly succeed in the aim you are goal, but it is to simply awake people that you are willing to go to prison because of this. Even with the police or angry mob hitting you, you just behave completely relaxed. That's why to some extent, I like the thought of little training in boxing, because after being hit 10 or 15 times, you get to be completely calm about it. Completely calm.
Oi, hvordan gikk det? Gikk det bra?
Ja, du må på den igjen.
Er du sikker?
Ja da, helt sikkert.
Fint.
Ja da.
Ja, flott.
Jeg kommer og angriper deg. Du står sånn.
Flott. Det er nydelig. Ja, det er fint.
Og så du... Hei. Og så holder jeg deg.
Nydelig. Det er fint.
En gang til med det der, det var litt vanskelig.
what was true at the time of Gandhi is true today also. That the civil disobedience in Arctic Norway during winter was much more successful than during summer, because more than 1,000 people were in the winter time doing demonstration, and they sent up 600 police. And then the population saw this on television or in the newspapers, and they saw that it was cold, very cold, and so you see, it's communication, basically, the civil disobedience, not direct to save something directly by means of breaking laws. So we have sinned against nature, we have sinned against God's creation, and we must live very much different. What God has created directly has value in itself, completely independent of any kind of usefulness for man. Waste a lot of energy, so we need a lot of progress. And that's what we have to understand by the term growth. And Gro Harlem Brundtland herself would, under pressure, say that. Of course, I do not mean growth as we have had it before. I mean our growth according to ecological criteria. But nobody has defined it that way, but it shows that under pressure, what they would like to mean by growth in the rich nation is ecologically sustainable progress in the rich nations.
We are overloading the planet's ability to absorb the effects of human activities in ways never before experienced in human history. While we still have time to make necessary changes, sustainable development is a participatory process on which we all should build.
Sustainable development, according to one interpretation of the Brundtland report, is that any kind of development today implies ecologically sustainable development. You have to have abundance of life around you and diversity. This is ecological sustainability. You have to choose an interpretation which is such that you can support it, because 22 politicians at a high level have said yes. And then you have to interpret a report in order to get an interpretation where they really said something important and very good ecologically. Therefore, because it's politically important to say to politicians, you have said so and so. So, how is your policy consistent with what you have said in the Brundtland report? And then they cannot say, oh, but you might interpret it so and so. No, no. They would feel the pressure in the direction of real responsibility ecologically. Tactical, we have to be tactical also. In 1972, every big newspaper and every people in power were for joining EEC. But the grassroots were not. They said, in Norway, they said, well, Oslo is bad enough. We don't want any new center even bigger. And today, we are fighting against, some of us are fighting against joining EEC. And it's interesting to see that it seems that there is some kind of deep distrust in a bigger center like this and a coalition of rich states. But then they say, but what about if you only Iceland and Norway are alone, suffering alone, where the others are all joining, Sweden and others are joining EEC. How can you stand alone like that? And for me, it's so ridiculous because it's only good for Europe to have a couple of rich states outside EEC to show that we can ecologically, for instance, do much which they cannot do in EEC. And philosophically, I think it is a cooperation internationally. And that means a cooperation with the second world, the third world, and trying to save little of the fourth world. That's what we are needed for. And we in Norway could do a lot to manifest that we go down to a policy and a lifestyle that is universalizable. And we could do that with our tremendous nice nature plus export of oil. We do not deserve the oil, but we can export. So we are really in a very good position to, in some ways, realize a ecologically responsible policy. If we stay outside, we will go down maybe a little in material standard of living, but that we are having to do anyhow. For ecological, we have to go down. And sustainability, that means in the long run you can keep on with the policies without hurting the richness and diversity of life on Earth. That's sustainability, philosophically, I think. So, rich life, simple means, not simple life. Whereas at the moment, the 500 millions or 800 millions of people living in so-called abundance, they cannot hope that the rest of mankind would reach anything like that level of just nonsense, which you call standard of living. Standard of living, out. Life quality, in. Life quality, how do you feel? How do you really feel? That's the important thing. And Tvers then has to do with that. And I hope that others will find other ways of reaching the same conclusions. I mean, the frontier is long. That's one of my favorite slogans. The frontier is very long. You have certain weaknesses, you have certain strengths. Come on, do things. Everybody. This is how it is.